Welcome back to Future Vision, the 2020 DTG Summit, coming to you live from London. If you're just joining us, you can catch up with previous sessions, which will all be available on demand, of course. And right now, we're going to hear about the impact that algorithms can have on our everyday lives. Award-winning multimedia journalist and filmmaker Ali Rae spent 6 months travelling the world and asking whether these invisible sets of rules are becoming too powerful. The results aired in an Al Jazeera series, which also won several awards. We invited Ali to tell us what she found and reflects on the connection between behavioural science and product design. Here she is.
Thank you for inviting me to speak today. As mentioned, my name's Ali Rae and I'm a multimedia journalist and filmmaker with Al Jazeera English based here in London. I'm going to be speaking about All Hail the Algorithm, which is a 5-part series we produced at the end of last year. And it was looking at the impact of algorithms on our everyday lives. And it's a 5-part series and it was first produced for online and then we converted it into a series for TV. I always think it's a bit helpful to have a bit of context to a series. I used to work on the social media team and I was fascinated with how we would speak about these algorithms. It would be this constant effort to try and understand this black box, and we'd be talking like, this is what the algorithm likes, or we can't do that because that's not what the algorithm likes. Well, the algorithm's changed. And I found it fascinating that all this unquestioned power was sort of being normalized, and how much faith we put into these systems being, so much smarter than us. At the time, there was plenty of talk from people about algorithms being manipulated, and the big stories at the time was, Cambridge Analytica, the US election in 2016, Russia's involvement. When I started to look into it a lot more, we discovered that algorithms are used in so many different contexts that many people would probably find quite surprising, like the criminal justice system, welfare systems, whether people are given a bank loan or not, biometric systems. And because it's invisible, I think that's quite fascinating to try and look at the impact of that system on people. With that in mind, All Hail the Algorithm really did set out to approach this subject in a very specific way. And that was to tell the story of the phenomenon of algorithms in a way that was relatable to everyday life. We wanted to make it much more accessible. You don't have to be, a tech whiz to understand. And crucially, in a way that, amplifies the voices that we feel, we're not hearing enough of on this subject. There's also a conscious effort to, never use tech cliches. And that was a bit of a challenge when you're trying to visualize the invisible, but we didn't want to use ones and zeros or little personified, robot figures, because these can sometimes give a mythical nature to issues that really at their heart are about, human control and power dynamics. I don't think it helps in making people feel like they can be part of the process in understanding how their lives are being impacted. So with that, I'll show you a brief clip of our trailer. Kind of gives you a bit of an overview.
There's one thing that touches nearly every aspect of our lives, whether you're using social media, putting in a health insurance claim, or online shopping. It's algorithms. My name's Ali Rae and I'm a journalist with Al Jazeera. For the past 6 months, I've been travelling around the world talking to people about how these invisible codes are increasingly playing an important role in our lives, to an extent that few of us would have ever imagined possible. Algorithms are just as much a part of our modern infrastructure as buildings or roads, so getting to grips with how they work and to whose benefit is really important if you want to understand the world we live in today.
People aren't aware of how many algorithms are at play in deciding their lives.
People might assume that because it's done by a computer, it's objective and correct.
The reality is that algorithms are trained on past human decisions and they're built by fallible humans themselves.
We talk about accuracy, we talk about fairness, but we don't talk about justice.
This isn't a series about the specifics of code or provoking fear that robots are taking over. It's about the here and now. How are algorithmic systems being built into our lives? How are they working? And what do we need to know so that we can deal with them? Can algorithms be trusted? Are they growing too powerful? Are they manipulating us, or are we actually manipulating each other through them? I've learnt a lot from the people that I've spoken with, and the result is a 5-part series we're calling All Hail the Algorithm.
So just to give you a bit of an overview of the different topics we looked at with algorithms impacting your life. So our first episode was looking at trust, and with that, it was how algorithms can be used in welfare systems. So for the second episode, we looked at power, and with that, it was the concept of data colonization. For the third episode, we looked at manipulation, and this time I managed to travel to Mexico to look at how a lot of the different techniques around manipulation and social media algorithms are first done in Mexico as sort of like a testing ground. Next up, for the fourth episode, we looked at biometrics, unique little algorithmic codes and measurements of us that are, have just grown in popularity. In this case, I looked at a case in Jordan where the World Food Programme is using biometric technology to basically help deliver food aid to refugees in Zatari refugee camp. Finally, for the fifth episode, we looked at consent, and in particular design. This is a really fascinating topic, and it sparks a lot of interest from people. I'm sure many of you have already heard countless stories about how social media platforms are designed to be addictive. But a couple of interesting reflections that I took away in particular from this episode. First of all is the I agree button that we all click every single time we go onto a website. And there's this really interesting debate that happens between, tech companies obviously want to make it as simple as possible. Then at the same time, there's this whole other question of, why do we use informed consent as the sort of legal parameters for us engaging online. Informed consent is only really used in two scenarios, one being surgery and the other being the way our data is processed online. And maybe for surgery, that makes sense because the likelihood of needing surgery would be hopefully quite rare for people. So they would have the time to consider what the options are. Clicking I agree, we'd do it a few hundred times a day, maybe. I think the second thing that's really fascinating when we consider the design of our technologies is we often think of them as only existing sort of in the here and now or being really innovative and forward thinking. And what I didn't realize until speaking to a lot of people is how much of the design is based on behavioural science from decades ago. So one of the clearest examples is this thing known as a Skinner box, and it's named after a social scientist called B.F. Skinner from the 1950s. And what he would do is he'd put an animal, for example, a pigeon, inside a box, and there'd be sort of a button or a lever or some kind of action that the animal would have to do in order to receive a reward. He could not only teach the animal to push the button, gets a food reward, push the button, get a food reward, but he was able to discover that in order to get the pigeon to push the button more, is you would vary the time at when the reward was received. So maybe it'd be the second time it presses the button, the next time it might be the fifth, then it might be the third, then it might be the first. And so the effect ended up being that the pigeon never really knew when it was going to get the reward, and so would keep pressing the button, and it acted as like an addiction. And what's fascinating about this is Skinner figured, if this could happen with pigeons and, other animals, could it be applied to humans? And one of the best examples that came from this was the slot machine. I'd never really considered, the pulling of the lever and the similarity to the pigeon pushing that button.
Just like on a slot machine, when you're texting or when you are looking through the news feed, you really never know what's coming down the pike. You never know when you're going to sort of hit that jackpot, so to speak, and when it's coming and how much it'll be. So the randomness is very important to keep you hooked in. I think the fact that we're gambling money in a casino isn't really that different than what we're doing, because in both cases, what we're really gambling is our attention and our time. Right.
But I also spoke to a really interesting person called Ali Rae. He's the man behind Infinite Scrolls. So, when you're late at night in bed going through TikToks or Facebook or Instagram, he invented that function.
1 out of every 4 human beings on Earth has a Skinner box, which is learning how to uniquely target them. super fascinating in the abstract, but sort of terrifying when you think about what it's doing.
There's such emphasis put on free choice and being able to be a consumer, and you make decisions in the marketplace about what you want to do because you have free will. But at the same time, the very people who are promoting that notion of the person as a consumer sovereign are operating and designing their technology with a very different human subject in mind. It's somebody who can, like a rat or a pigeon or any other animal, be incentivized and motivated and hooked in and have their attention redirected. And that's really interesting to me because it is a kind of return to Skinner.
I think making those connections between, you know, behavior scientists of the 50s to the introduction of slot machines to now looking at social media and the way our, you know, social platforms are designed, you see this growth. It's not just sort of out of nowhere. And there's also a little bit of solace that I think comes from recognizing that, you know, we're all just animals. We can have our time manipulated, we can have it diverted, and with that comes, you know, an understanding that maybe the problems that exist within these tools need to be carefully thought about until they're just sort of unleashed onto a society without thinking properly about what their impact could be. There's obviously so much more that I could speak about, but I figured it's probably helpful just to end with a couple of key takeaways in case it's helpful for anyone. First of all, it's just that to question digital systems doesn't make you automatically a Luddite. You know, I love technology, I rely on technology. It's 2020, we need to move past this idea of it being, you know, a binary discussion of, you know, you're either for or against it. Technology is obviously useful and helpful, but I think we really do need to have some serious conversations about what the impact is on people and who is involved in making those decisions. The question at the heart of a lot of these debates aren't technical. They're often questions about justice, equality, accountability, transparency, fairness. And those kind of questions you don't need a PhD in mathematics to engage with. And so I think maybe removing that veil of exclusivity and trying to be a bit more inclusive with these discussions will really benefit everyone in the long run. Second big takeaway point is just that understanding that algorithms impact us all, but that doesn't mean it's done equally. And so acknowledging that algorithmic systems aren't perfect, they're built by fallible humans, and they're ultimately only as good as the data that feeds them. And I think that's really important to understand. We shouldn't be treating these systems like, you know, the computer must be right. I think we should be questioning, you know, what information goes in, and should a system even be in place in this place, or is a human being in this role more appropriate? So third is that contrary to popular belief, a lot of these high-tech systems can trickle up in society. So I think a lot of people tend to think that, you know, by the time people are using their biometrics to check out at, you know, their local supermarket, that they're the first ones to get to try it. But really, if you investigate it, a lot of the trial and development has taken place in other areas. And understanding just how much of that testing does take place in low rights environments, I think, should be a cause of concern for a lot of people, whether that be, you know, criminal justice system, refugees, welfare systems, police surveillance. I'll leave it there, but thank you so much for listening. If you would like to see the full series, you can go to aljazeera.com/all hail the algorithm, and you'll find all the episodes there. Thank you so much.
Ali, thank you very much. Some really fascinating food for thought there. Well, we're going to take another short break now, and when we come back, what impact does television in all its forms have on the environment? That's in our next session. See you then.